Prof, you're sitting somewhere in the Cape. I'm sitting somewhere in Joburg. We are distanced, but together. And that's, I guess, what everybody has to hope for, that the whole world finds togetherness despite the distance. What's going through you? Are you thinking a lot about about education? I know you're writing all the time. What are you doing to stay sane? Like me, you like to get out, you like to be gregarious, you like to see people and talk. What's changed in your head?
Well, what's changed in my head is that I think a lot about the future. What are we going to look like in a post-corona world? You know, what kind of choices are we going to make? What kind of emotions are we going to have? What will our relationships with people be like? So, yeah, I mean, I try to think my way out of these puzzles and to think about it not simply in a way that is sort of hard on the facts, but also in a way that is hopeful, you know, about how we make the world and how we remake the world after the virus. So quite a bit of my time, whether it is, you know, in my study at home or in bed or when I'm just sitting outside on the porch watching the sunset, a lot of my thinking is, what are we going to be like when we get out of here? Now, make no mistake, we're going to get out of here. The big question, of course, is how do we come out of here? And that is something I'm actually quite optimistic about.
What's going to happen in education in 1 minute?
Well,
in the real world, we've talked so long about distance learning and you know, the demise of universities as we know them. What do you, from your point of view and with your colleagues, what's your thinking?
Well, in the long term, what's going to happen is that the world will switch on big time into online learning. And that is now not simply a nice to have for, you know, the middle classes. This becomes a reality for all of our schools, all of our universities. And the reason I believe that is because we know for a fact that this pandemic is one among many still to come. And we tend to forget that there were a few just behind us. You know, think of SARS, and I don't mean the revenue service. Think of swine flu. Think of Ebola. Think of all of the major epidemics, some of which became pandemics affecting the whole world. And so we need to think differently about how we deliver education in the future. And it's very, very clear to me that the countries that switch on their education systems to the idea that whenever I prepare a module or a course or a curriculum, I do it in two modes. The one is for face-to-face, which is what we normally do in traditional teaching and learning, and the other is, of course, online. This does mean you need to invest massively in infrastructure, in bandwidth, in, you know, laptops and computers of all kinds, so that when the lights go off, if you know what I mean, because of another pandemic, we can simply switch on and off into from face-to-face to online learning. That is the future of education, not just for South Africa, but for the planet. And the countries that recognize that new reality now are the countries that will be able to ride the wave of successive pandemics, and there will be many, that hit the world in the years to come.
You know, the biggest thing that comes to my mind, and I know it's something that's very close to your heart, is that we are so unequal when it comes to that. You and I can switch on our laptop or our computer or our smartphone, and we can do that. We're going to have to put a lot of effort and a lot of persuasiveness towards the people who enable all of us, everyone, wherever we are, who needs to learn, to be able to learn. So that means making data available. And I'm going to be talking to Alan Knott Craig about that. That's one of his big things. But so that I know we have to address. How do you ever find yourself getting down at the moment? I mean, apart from the fact you can't go out for a naughty ice cream or a donut.
That's probably good for a diabetic. But you know,
Yeah.
it's very hard for me to be down because I live in a world in which I choose to see the good in people, in which, I mean, just every single day I get a call from somebody. In fact, one of my postdoctoral students is putting together a website of all the good things happening right now in society. People who are feeding children who are no longer part of school feeding schemes because of the lockdown, you know, nurses and doctors that literally put their lives on the line because of a lack of adequate equipment, etc., around the world. So I mean, one of the upsides of such a terrible, you know, crisis is that it brings out the best in people around the world and around our own country in South Africa. So I'm very, very optimistic. I don't get down, but I do try to think about how do we get out of our dilemmas. Now, one of the dilemmas, as you correctly mentioned, is that we have an unequal school system. So what the virus does, it doesn't make us poor, it reveals our poverty, it reveals our inequalities, you know. And so on the one hand, I hear wonderful stories, and they are wonderful, about, you know, affluent schools that are able to use Google Classrooms and, you know, using Gmail accounts to create closed accounts on YouTube and deliver lectures, even people using WhatsApp to exchange PDF files and so on. That is fantastic. The problem is that works for about 20% of our schools. It doesn't work for 80%. So the message, the take home for me is not to sort of say, oh my goodness me, we're unequal. The take home is to say, how do we make ourselves more equal? How do we deliver that capacity with technology so that poorer schools can also access, you know, synchronous learning, for example, that is live teaching and learning in interaction with the teacher. By the way, I just heard of a school that in Cape Town that this week is going to use Meet to have a school assembly, a live school assembly. This is pretty amazing. Now, there's no reason why we cannot do that for all our schools. But as I said, this takes investment on the part of government and the private sector. And I'm hoping that the one lesson we take away from the crisis is to bridge those inequalities using technology.
I've loved this. Can we do this again next week?
Yeah.
Okay. Then, okay, I'm going to ask you to do something for me this time next week. Will you sit at your piano? Will you play something for us next week as well?
I will. I don't have a piano at this home. I have it at the other house, but I'll make a plan and we will do it.
If there's a way. Well, when you can, because I know you play the piano, and the people who've seen you love it. And let's show just another side of your talent. How's your writing going?
Good. I just finished a book that I started writing it at the start of the lockdown. I finished it last night. It is called How to Make Your Education Work for You. And it's, you know, I've always wanted to write a book for kids, a book for students at university and students at school, by telling my story, which is in many ways an unlikely story because, you know, I didn't, you know, the story. And it's a way in which to share tips with students about don't do this, do that. This is a better route. That's a really dangerous route. So I put together in 100 pages. I decided not to make it a long book, something that any kid can pick up and sort of say, you know what should I study? What happens if I do this rather than that? You know, how do I get hold of a mentor? What do I do when things are against me? So yeah, I'm hoping this will get out soon and help students.
Yeah, does this also make people think again about their career paths? Because so many existing careers won't exist.
Exactly. And so there is a section in the book that talks about what if things shut down for you? How do you make things happen when it appears that the route you chose doesn't work for you anymore? Absolutely.
I can't wait to see that. You're still writing a book a month, are you?
A book a month.
That's unbelievable. I can't even color in a book a month.
Well, I tell you, I enjoy writing enormously. Some books are more complicated, and like the one I've just started, which will take a bit longer. But there's an enormous joy in writing and thinking and sharing with the reading public.
Well, don't stop doing that. I'm connecting with you this time next week. That's a date. Thanks, Prof.
Take care.
Bye.